The moment he enters the classroom, the students are stunned, doubting he is really a transfer student because he looks more like an average exchange student. Regardless, the teacher insists Kang Gion introduce himself and he gives a brief introduction. The class beauty immediately takes an interest in our protagonist. Obviously, this doesn't sit well with some of the male students in the classroom. Anyways, the teacher proceeds with the lesson, suggesting the class solve the math problem on the board. Kang Gion simply takes one look at the problem before loudly declaring the answer. At first, the homeroom teacher is stunned. Moments later, a girl solves the problem herself and confirms our protagonist's answer is indeed correct. Now the teacher is both shocked and amazed. Solving an advanced sequence mentally and in such a short time is unheard of. Now the class beauty is becoming even more interested in our protagonist. Meanwhile, Kang Gion just sits there with his arms crossed, farming aura. In his head, he thinks he must do everything to complete the mission. In the beginning, our protagonist came to South Korea with his parents. Immediately, his dad begins acting up, noting that the air is indeed different. Meanwhile, his mom chuckles softly at his reaction, playfully insisting he keep his voice down. However, our protagonist immediately makes us realize they are nowhere close to being a real family. He calls his supposed father and mother comrades, asking what the need is for wearing casual clothes. His mom immediately strikes him on the head, insisting he behave properly in public. This causes our protagonist to recount everything that led to this point. From a young age, he embarked on serious military training that was far from ordinary. At the same time, he studied school curriculums that were way ahead of his level. Our protagonist continues down this path, training non-stop like he is preparing for a mission he isn't even aware of. Now a teenager, Kang Gion is summoned by his commander. The commander briefs him about a mission to be carried out in South Korea. The duration of the mission should last at least 10 years or even longer. His mission is to infiltrate the upper class of a Seoul high school. All necessary arrangements have already been made for him to carry out the mission. Furthermore, our protagonist's mission involves waiting for orders from a certain party. Nonetheless, our protagonist accepts the mission. At the same time, people exit the elevator behind him. The commander explains that the two officers are going to be his comrades. These male and female soldiers are to play the role of his parents. Back in the present at our protagonist's home, his mom asks her husband if he thinks our protagonist will be fooled. Seeing her worried expression, the man reassures her, insisting they shouldn't be in such a hurry. The fact that they managed to get out of the base should already be considered a miracle, and that alone should be enough for now. The moment class ends, our protagonist is swarmed by a group of excited girls. He doesn't even get the chance to speak before being bombarded with questions. They ask about his previous school, and one even asks if he has a girlfriend. These girls are fierce, trying to get anything out of him. Just when Kang Gion is at a loss for what to say, the class beauty suddenly appears, causing the small fries to step aside. She begins the conversation by properly introducing herself as Lee Ara. Our protagonist sinks into contemplation as he continues staring at her face. It turns out that a day before coming to school, he reviews a report about his future school, and Lee Ara is on the list. Just then, his dad enters with a stack of files in the middle of the session. He explains that the files contain all his targets of interest, and there are more targets than initially expected. When our protagonist responds positively, his dad immediately corrects him. They are no longer at the base, so he shouldn't address him formally. Basically, he should behave more like a typical Gen Z. After hearing this, our protagonist nods in understanding. Back in the present, he stares at Lee Ara, noting that she is labeled as the #1 person of interest. She is Lee Ara, a 5-star priority target and the eldest daughter of the Samjung Group, South Korea's largest multinational corporation. Recalling his mission, our protagonist thinks to himself that he needs to maintain a good relationship in order to extract information from the Samjung Group in the future. So when Lee Ara asks why he remains silent, he is about to respond before she suddenly pulls out her phone and asks for his Instagram account. However, our protagonist has no clue what that means. She soon realizes he has no social media accounts, so naturally she asks for his phone in order to give him her number. Bro just scores a baddie without even trying. Unfortunately for him, every word she speaks sounds alien. Now the group is left in shock, realizing our protagonist doesn't even have a cell phone. A bit confused, she asks if he has a problem or if he climbed out from under a rock. Realizing this is a total waste of her time, she turns and leaves. As a result, our protagonist is left petrified in shock. Meanwhile, the rest of his classmates enjoy the scene like pure cinema. Later, after classes are over, luxury cars are seen packed outside. Our protagonist is just observing when a girl passes by him. He shifts his attention toward her, noting that she is labeled Priority 0 in the report. His thoughts are interrupted when someone bumps into him. It is obvious the girl has her own security team, and our protagonist locks eyes with the man who bumps into him for a moment. Once the Priority 0 girl enters her ride, the rest of the students, including Lee Ara, follow. Yep, these kids definitely come from powerful and influential families. Just as our protagonist is minding his business, he sees a hand trying to push him aside. It is his classmate, but fortunately our protagonist has quick reflexes thanks to his hellish training. Seeing this, the guy expresses surprise. When our protagonist doesn't respond, the guy becomes furious and leaves, fuming that he is getting on his nerves. Once the troublemaker leaves, a student suddenly approaches our protagonist from behind. The guy is Jang Dong-woo, a 3-star priority target. His father is the CEO of Hansen Law Firm, and his mother is a judge, so yeah, you definitely don't want a case with this guy. Nonetheless, Jang Dong-woo explains that the troublemaker's behavior is normal since they all come from great families. He then offers our protagonist a ride if he doesn't already have someone picking him up. Our protagonist adopts a thoughtful expression before accepting, leaving Jang Dong-woo slightly stunned. On the road, Jang Dong-woo curiously asks where our protagonist lives. He casually replies that it is Banpo Blue Tower. The guy can't believe it. Our protagonist is living in the most expensive apartment in the city. Still, he insists that the driver take our protagonist home first. The driver nods, acknowledging his young master's wishes. As the car falls silent, our protagonist can tell Jang Dong-woo has something to say. After some time, the guy gathers the courage to ask how he manages to solve the math problem mentally back in class. When our protagonist responds with a puzzled expression, Jang Dong-woo misunderstands and apologizes, adding that he just finds him amazing, especially solving the problem in his head. Furthermore, Jang Dong-woo reveals that he is actually bad at math. So naturally, our protagonist asks if he needs a tutor, which immediately catches his attention. Jang Dong-woo becomes excited when our protagonist offers to tutor him. In his head, our protagonist thinks his mission is proceeding smoothly. However, when Jang Dong-woo teasingly brings up the topic of him not having a phone or Instagram, our protagonist becomes startled. Meanwhile, in Lee Ara's car, she calls for her father's secretary, who is driving her. She informs him about the new transfer student and says she wants to know what kind of boy he is. When Secretary Kim mentions informing the strategy department to run a deep investigation, she shakes her head. Understanding her intentions, Secretary Kim assures her the documents will be ready before night. Meanwhile, she sits there smiling, clearly thinking about our protagonist. Speaking of him, he has just arrived home as his mom welcomes him cheerfully. Kang Gi-on is taken aback and speechless by the way she is acting. Seeing his expression, the woman reminds him that this is the part where he is supposed to respond cheerfully. His dad, or rather his supervisor, waits for his response. A bit embarrassed, our protagonist announces that he is home, greeting his comrades as his parents. Because of this, his mother smacks him and sends him to his room. He insists on knowing what is going on and why she is acting like that. She tells him to see for himself. Our protagonist freezes, wondering if this is even his room anymore, because the place looks completely different from before. Seeing this, Kang Gi-on wonders if it is okay to use operation funds like this. His mom chuckles, asking if that even matters since they are filthy rich. Our protagonist then shifts his attention to the desk and immediately picks up the phone. Turning to his mom, he asks for help accessing Instagram. However, she is completely clueless and doesn't know what he is talking about. That's when his dad steps in confidently, assuring him to leave everything to him. At this point, our protagonist genuinely can't tell if these two are acting or just developing some weird chemistry. We cut to Lee Ara doing her evening workout. She eventually stops when she is approached by her father's secretary, who hands her a file. The file contains information about our protagonist's parents, particularly his dad. According to the report, his father, Steve Kang, is a second-generation American and the CEO of 11 Coin, one of the top 10 cryptocurrencies. In simple terms, the guy is insanely rich, with a net worth of at least 30 billion won. Lee Ara finds this interesting. Secretary Kim adds that aside from crypto, Steve Kang's company has grown significantly over the past 10 years through networking security in Japan and the United States, and China is now beginning to show interest in his services. In simple terms, Our protagonist's wealth is on the same level as the rest of the students in his class. When Secretary Kim suggests digging deeper, she shakes her head, indicating there is no need. Lee Ara thinks that with this, our protagonist is at least qualified to hang out with her. The next scene takes us to Seoul International High School. Our protagonist is seated in class with his phone. Lee Ara, in the middle of a conversation with her friends, curiously turns toward our protagonist. The guy has his phone out, and the girl begins staring at him intently. Our protagonist is confused at first, but then casually shows her his phone. We can tell what's going on in her head just by looking at her. Meanwhile, Jang Dongwoo turns to our protagonist, surprised that he now has a phone. But suddenly, their conversation is interrupted. It just happens to be the class troublemakers. Smirking, the red-haired guy asks if Jang Dongwoo is friends with our protagonist. Jang Dongwoo becomes anxious, confirming it before adding that our protagonist is his math tutor. Meanwhile, the red-haired guy's friend keeps staring at our protagonist, as if trying to size him up. Our protagonist is also closely observing both of them. Regardless, the red-haired guy expresses dominance by resting his hand on Jang Dongwoo's head, insisting that he study hard. But he adds that he has some personal business with our protagonist. Jang Dongwoo doesn't say a word. He fully understands the unspoken message and quietly leaves, making the idiot show a satisfied smirk. Our protagonist remembers that this idiot is Go Jin-seok. The narrative describes him as a 4-star priority, and the second son of National Assembly member Go Young-chan, who is the CEO of JU Ram. Basically, the guy is from a powerful political family that ranks at the top, making him a potential candidate to become the next president in Seoul. It's no wonder the guy acts like he rules the world. He's probably been told that too many times. Meanwhile, his friend, a 2-star priority, Hwang Woo-young, is the eldest son of Hwang Jae-chul, the president of the Daejong Group. These guys are ranked in the top 30 businesses in the world, and their company is centered in the global sports industry. Even with all that in mind, our protagonist still puts on the brightest smile and asks if they want him to tutor them too. Jin Seok responds with a blank expression, while Hwang Woo-young looks furious. Still, Jin Seok walks away, insisting that Hwang Woo-young show our protagonist how things work here. So the guy tells our protagonist to listen up. He explains that if there's one thing our protagonist must know in this class, it's that he must remain invisible and know his place. Our protagonist can clearly see the guy's hostile intentions. For a brief moment, he wonders how he could respond to this. For instance, he could simply knock the guy out in a split second. Of course, the entire class would know what hit him. But of course, this is all in our protagonist's head. Switching to a friendlier approach, our protagonist politely asks what Hwang Woo-young is talking about. The guy seems confused. In response, our protagonist shows him how to apply pressure the right way while grabbing the idiot's arm. Now the fool almost hits the ground. Hwang Woo-young is obviously confused. He can't break free no matter how much he struggles, while our protagonist insists this is not how classmates should behave. Damn bro is getting humiliated and lectured at the same time. Jin Seok finally looks up, clearly puzzled. Hwang Woo-young eventually yanks his hand away, or rather, our protagonist lets the fool off. But the idiot makes another mistake. Out of anger, he moves to punch our protagonist. To our protagonist, Hwang Woo-young is moving in slow motion, and he isn't concerned. Because yeah, his main focus is the security camera. Before coming to school, his dad explained that South Korea is filled with surveillance cameras everywhere. Our protagonist was shocked when he saw his classroom. His dad nodded. Not just his classroom, but the entire school's surveillance had been hijacked by him. The man proudly announced that this level of hacking was nothing to him. Naturally, our protagonist praised him for the good work and accidentally called him comrade. The man immediately became serious and warned him about his tone and formal speech. The poor guy still thinks he's at the base in North Korea. Nonetheless, his dad advises him never to take part in violence, because as his son can see, everything is being recorded. Back to the present, our protagonist dodges the punch at the last second and immediately uses his desk to knock Hwang Woo-young back. The guy stumbles backward. Now Hwang Woo-young is really furious, unlike our protagonist, who maintains a cold, stone-like expression while giving off a calm aura. Lee Ara has had enough of the idiot's antics. Annoyed, she asks how much further he plans to embarrass himself. Seeing this, Jin Seok speaks up, pointing out that our protagonist is a transfer student, meaning he doesn't know the situation. In other words, it's only natural that he needs to be educated. Hearing this stupid logic, she fires back. pointing out how they're just embarrassing themselves. Clearly, she can see that our protagonist isn't even trying. If he were, that fool would have been sent to the infirmary a long time ago. Still furious, Huang Wuyong decides to let our protagonist off for now. Kang Gion happily nods, even suggesting they chat later. Forget it. Our boy is a pro in the rage-baiting department. After things settle down, our protagonist looks at Jin Seok. Since the guy is a 4-star priority target, he wonders how he can get close to him. Soon, class begins, and our protagonist still has no idea how to proceed with his plan. Just then, the teacher notices the new face in the classroom and wonders if our protagonist can keep up with the Korean language. Our protagonist responds fluently in proper Korean. The teacher immediately notices his decent pronunciation and asks where he studied. Our protagonist replies that he studied in America. Just to flex, he adds, in both English and Korean, that he came to Korea because of his father's business. The class becomes lively, and the teacher notes that his accent in both languages is spot on. Because of this, Lee Ara begins to pay more attention to him. Of course, this makes both Huang Wuyong and Jin Seok furious. The moment class ends, our protagonist is immediately approached by the same group of girls. One points out that his pronunciation is even better than the teacher's. They wonder why he didn't talk much about where he's from the previous day. This leads him to immediately hand them his phone, and one of the girls quickly takes it. It turns out to be Lee Ara, who suddenly appears in front of him and grabs his phone, commenting that the brand is from her family's company. Seeing this, our protagonist thinks to himself that the mission is going smoothly. The girl becomes surprised when our protagonist mentions that he's on Instagram. Naturally, Lee Ara starts going through his posts, but she doesn't spot anything suspicious, even though it's obvious the photos are clearly Photoshop. So when she calls our protagonist's family a happy one, he simply nods. Meanwhile, he thinks to himself, just as expected. His dad is really reliable when it comes to hacking. Eventually, classes come to an end. By the end of school, our protagonist watches as luxury cars begin rolling in like a car show. He considers waiting in line because his father has promised to come pick him up, and feels excited about it. Priority 0 passes by without saying much, as usual, followed by Lee Ara, who then turns and waves goodbye, adding that they will meet tomorrow. With that, she leaves with a smile, and our protagonist mirrors her expression, thinking that the girl is showing interest in him. However, this makes Huang Wuyong and Jin Seok furious, so Huang Wuyong steps up, inviting our protagonist to follow him. Our protagonist looks at both of them, and in his mind he decides to recruit them. So when he politely asks where they are going, Huang Wuyong insists he get in the car while he is still asking nicely. The entire school sees this and instantly realizes what is about to happen to him. But to our protagonist, he sees this as a perfect chance to complete the mission. A sudden sound of a high horsepower engine roaring catches everyone's attention. Everyone turns to see a red sports car. The driver looks like he is auditioning for the next Fast and Furious movie. And of course, the person turns out to be our protagonist's very own dad. The entire school falls into complete silence. Even Huang Wuyong and Jin Seok stand frozen, as if their brains are still processing what is happening. Our protagonist's dad is that classic case. Trying to save himself from embarrassment, our protagonist quickly walks toward him. After briefing him on the current situation, his dad immediately flashes a wide grin and gives a thumbs up, loudly praising our protagonist for making new friends. This makes him feel awkward because of his dad's very dramatic enthusiasm. Immediately, his dad shifts gears and slams the gas pedal. The guy leaves, not forgetting to tell our protagonist to come home early. It will definitely be a miracle if the guy arrives home safely. Turning to Huang Wuyong and Jin Seok, the guys become furious, as if his dad personally insulted their family with his stunt, and Jin Seok declares that our protagonist really needs to be educated. Later, while driving to their destination, our protagonist finds the car strangely quiet and naturally wonders where they are going. Eventually, they all arrive at a tall skyscraper. Judging from the name, it definitely belongs to the Daejong Group. In other words, Huang Wuyong's dad's company. Jin Seok begins to enter while insisting his guard stay behind. Our protagonist watches carefully while the guard notes that Jin Seok is outside the school, so naturally he shouldn't leave his side for any reason. But Jin Seok just ignores him, and our protagonist watches the guard's disappointed expression. The moment the group enters inside, our protagonist realizes it is a training facility. The one in charge immediately steps up to greet Huang Wuyong personally. When Huang Wuyong tells him to clear the third cage, he agrees and lowers his head respectfully as he leaves to prepare. Already knowing what is coming, the man whispers to our protagonist, insisting he just apologize, adding that he has already arranged for an ambulance. Our protagonist obviously doesn't understand what he means. Suddenly, Huang Wuyong shouts, demanding to know why our protagonist is just standing there. It seems he is beginning to understand what is about to happen. Arriving at the reserved cage, our protagonist watches as Huang Wuyong begins to prepare for their fight. Seeing his expression, Jin-suk speaks from above, noting that it has been a while since someone entered the training facility with them, wearing a puzzled expression. When our protagonist asks if this means he and Huang Wuyong are going to spar, the guy begins to laugh like a side villain, adding that it really doesn't matter. Now he tells our protagonist to hurry up and sign, while Huang Wuyong points to a document on the table. The document is an agreement between both parties. No matter the outcome or injury, no side will be held responsible. After reading it clearly, our protagonist asks if Jin-suk really wants him to sign the paper. The guy laughs, thinking our protagonist is scared. He really has no idea what is about to happen. Still, he even has the audacity to insist he will let everything slide if our protagonist kneels and begs like a dog. Yep, the fool just crossed a line. Jin-suk doesn't get the reaction he imagined, and now he thinks our protagonist is a foolish bastard. Anyways, before proceeding, our protagonist casually asks if the building has surveillance. Both guys clearly don't understand. Their reaction is enough confirmation that there will be no recording during the fight. Seeing our boy taking the initiative to sign first, Jin-suk mocks him, pointing out that Huang Wuyong has beaten even Korean champions. Basically, our protagonist just signed his death certificate. Something flips in our protagonist's expression. He insists Huang Wuyong hurry up and sign his own part of the document. The guy is literally cooked, and he's going to be sent to rehab for 6 months. Because yeah, that's the forecast. Now, inside the cage, Huang Wuyong is still acting smug. The idiot clearly doesn't know what he just signed up for. Meanwhile, our protagonist calmly prepares. Huang Wuyong mistakes his calm expression as fear. He even laughs before beginning to approach our protagonist. The entire time, our protagonist is just wondering how he's supposed to deal with this guy. He lays out all his options. He could simply end the fight immediately with a simple yet devastating counterpunch, but that would cause serious damage, so he removes it from the equation. Next, he could dodge and aim for the guy's lower torso. Surely that would end the fight, but it would also result in internal injuries, so that option is out as well. Our protagonist runs through countless scenarios of ending the fight in an instant, and all of them would seriously harm Huang Wuyong. But here's the shocking part. While our protagonist has already gone through all these scenarios, Huang Wuyong is still in the process of throwing a single punch. Coming back to his senses, our protagonist simply tilts his head slightly before the punch can land. Huang Wuyong immediately follows up with an uppercut. However, our boy sees everything in slow motion. Just like before, he dodges before the hit can land. Now both Huang Wuyong and the entire group are stunned. They didn't expect our protagonist to dodge, especially at such close range. Huang Wuyong quickly creates some distance. He admits our protagonist isn't bad and asks if he works out. However, our protagonist responds with his usual stoic expression, which completely infuriates Huang Wuyong. Fed up, he lashes out again. But to everyone's shock, our protagonist responds with a slap to the guy's face. Yeah, no one saw that coming. Huang Wuyong becomes furious and charges at him once again, only to get brutally slapped again. At this point, it's clear this isn't even a fight. Our protagonist just keeps slapping and educating him. Bro gets humiliated and receives the kind of home training his parents clearly forgot to give him. Next time, he definitely won't pick a fight he can't win. Seeing everyone's stunned reaction, our protagonist, just to rub salt in the wound, points out that he was going easy on the guy. He's about to leave when Jin-suk suddenly stops him. Our protagonist looks confused, but Jin-suk literally runs up to him, declaring that from now on our protagonist is his right-hand man. Of course, our protagonist has no idea what that even means. Seeing this, Jin-suk asks his security guard for his opinion. The guy doesn't answer. Even though our protagonist still doesn't understand what being a right-hand man means, Jin-suk tells him he'll eventually get it. Then he asks if our protagonist knows who his father is. Naturally, our protagonist pretends he has no clue. Regardless, Jin-suk insists on treating him to a 5-star restaurant to celebrate his victory. This puzzles our protagonist, who simply thinks his mission is going according to plan. Eventually, our protagonist returns home. His mom immediately welcomes him back, while his dad asks about his day, normal parent stuff. Noticing he looks exhausted, his mom announces she made dinner. But our protagonist politely refuses, saying he already ate with a friend. His mom turns to his dad, but the man just shrugs, clearly having no idea what's going on. Now inside his room, our protagonist lies on his bed and begins to reflect on his earlier conversation with Jin-suk. Back at the fancy restaurant, Jin-suk treated him and even insisted he eat as much as he wanted. Our protagonist found the meal very tasty. Seeing his reaction, Jin-suk laughed. Because of that, our protagonist recalls Jin-suk's earlier behavior and starts wondering if the guy has some kind of split personality. Anyway, Jin-suk tells him that being his right-hand man isn't much work, it's nothing special. His job is simply to beat down anyone trying to climb up the ranks, although Jin-suk doubts that will even happen. Our protagonist understands the logic but adds that he doesn't like fighting weaklings. When Jin-suk mentions that he definitely won't be facing weak opponents, our protagonist brings up Jang Dongwoo. Jin-suk pauses for a moment as if trying to remember his own classmate, then laughs, noting that the guy isn't weak. Seeing our protagonist's curiosity, Jin-suk explains that back in middle school, he used to be part of Dongwoo's circle. Our protagonist clearly doesn't follow, so Jin-suk asks if he knows what a lackey is, but of course, he has no clue. Jin-suk becomes serious as he explains that Dongwoo's family, the Jang family, is one of the top legal families in Korea. The boy's dad is a chief prosecutor at the Central District, while his mom is a judge in the High Court. Just imagine if those two got divorced and fought for custody. Anyway, Jin-suk explains that back then, he used to do everything Jang Dongwoo told him. Basically, he was his lackey. But that changed when his own dad got a new position. In summary, Jin-suk tells our protagonist that Korea is the kind of place where family presence and influence matter a lot. Back in the present, our protagonist thinks to himself this mission is going to be a lot more difficult than he expected. Just then, our protagonist hears a knock on his door. His parents open it, both wearing worried expressions. They ask if something happened at school or if anything is bothering him. Our protagonist pauses for a moment before responding that nothing is wrong. Clearly, his parents don't believe him. After some time, our protagonist admits that South Korea is a bit complicated and that things are different from what he was taught at the base. He naturally worries about whether he'll be able to adapt. Hearing this, his old man immediately reprimands him, telling him not to make such weak excuses. He asks if our protagonist has already forgotten who he is. That remark catches him off guard. Our protagonist immediately stands upright and apologizes for losing focus, promising it won't happen again. Yeah, maybe this is what good parenting looks like. His parents feel proud as they see his renewed determination. And just like that, our protagonist starts surfing the internet, going through every Reddit post imaginable. He's literally gathering information like a man on a mission, all just to navigate his school life better. While doing this, he remembers his training as an elite soldier and notes that he cannot fail this mission. Meanwhile, his parents secretly observe him the whole time, feeling proud. The next scene takes us to the following day in class. Jang Dongwoo seems to have something on his mind. Turning to our protagonist, he expresses concern, hoping nothing happened to him the previous day. Our protagonist looks at Jang Dongwoo's timid personality. It's hard to believe this guy bullied Jin-suk back in middle school. With that in mind, our protagonist asks him directly if he used to be a bully. He explains that Jin-suk told him everything, saying that back then he was Jang Dongwoo's personal lackey. Jang Dongwoo doesn't deny it. Instead, he gives the classic excuse, saying he was young and didn't really know what he was doing. Our protagonist tells him to relax, noting that it's all in the past and he doesn't care about it. After all, they're friends now. Jang Dongwoo is a bit taken aback. Meanwhile, our protagonist thinks that reaction is completely normal. Jang Dongwoo accepts it regardless. However, he immediately stiffens the moment he sees Jin-suk approaching. Before anything else, he expresses relief that nothing happened to our protagonist the previous day. Hearing this, our protagonist reassures him once again, insisting he shouldn't worry. He reminds him that they're friends now, so there's no need to stress. Just then, Jin-suk calls out to him. Seeing him, our protagonist casually thanks him for the meal the previous day. The entire class is shocked. I mean, as the saying goes, never accept anything from the rich. You'll pay for it tenfold. So when our protagonist offers to treat Jin-suk in return, the guy cuts him off and simply points at Hwang Woo-young's seat, insisting he sit there. That's when our protagonist realizes Hwang Woo-young is absent. Seeing him hesitate, Jin-suk demands to know why he's still standing there. Our protagonist freezes for a moment before realizing this is a rearrangement of class hierarchy, something he read about during his research. In other words, sitting in Huang Wuyong's seat automatically makes him number 2 in the class. Everyone understands what's happening except our protagonist, who still thinks everything is going smoothly. Anyway, classes continue. After 4 periods, our protagonist begins to wonder why Huang Wuyong didn't show up. As if to answer that, the next scene takes us to the Daejeon group. Inside, Huang Wuyong is getting absolutely wrecked by his dad. The man is furious that his son couldn't even complete a simple task. Huang Jae-chul's expression darkens as he angrily demands to know if his son has any idea how much money he burned, just to force him into the same special class as our protagonist. The secretary tries to calm him down, saying Huang Wuyong should have learned his lesson. But the man is still furious. Apparently, he wanted his son to get close to Jinsuk, since the boy's father is in line to become the next president. His son's job was simple: stay close to him. Instead, he failed miserably and even embarrassed himself. Fed up, Huang Jae-chul tells him to leave, saying he doesn't want to see his face. And just like that, Huang Wuyong walks out without looking back. Afterward, Huang Jae-chul asks his secretary about what he found. The man explains our protagonist's background. His father, Kang Steve, owns a multinational company dealing with 11 coin and runs security programs across different countries. In short, the family is loaded. At first, it seems like Huang Wuyong's dad softens a bit, even suggesting he invite our protagonist's father to a meal. But when the secretary asks for the location, the man's expression turns dark as he insists he bring our protagonist's dad to the gym. The secretary immediately understands the assignment. Huang Wuyong's dad simply wants to send a message to anyone who dares mess with his business. Meanwhile, back at school, Lee Ara waves goodbye to our protagonist as usual. Just then, Jinsuk's guard quietly tells our protagonist to be careful and to take good care of his parents. Of course, our protagonist has no idea what he means. Jinsuk simply says they'll meet again the next day before leaving. Watching them go, our protagonist starts thinking about that strange warning regarding his parents. After some time, his dad arrives to pick him up. As usual, the man is ever energetic, leaving our boy speechless as always. Later that day, during dinner, our protagonist eats quietly while his parents chat away. Their peaceful family time is suddenly interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Naturally, everyone wonders who could be visiting at this hour. Standing outside is none other than the secretary of the Daejeon group. Our protagonist immediately feels uneasy, but his dad insists on hearing why the man came, especially at such a late hour. Getting straight to the point, the man claims that our protagonist assaulted the heir, his boss's son. Both parents are stunned and immediately turn to look at him. Our protagonist stiffens, completely unable to understand how things escalated to this point. Sensing the tense atmosphere, the secretary explains that Huang Wuyong's dad has no intention of making this a big issue and simply wants to have a chat over a meal. Hearing this, the couple feels relieved. After all, it was just a small scuffle between kids. With that said, the secretary insists that our protagonist's dad follow him to meet his chairman if he has the time. The man agrees immediately, almost a little too quickly, making things feel suspicious. Our protagonist is about to follow, but his dad orders him to stay behind. Of course, both our protagonist and his mom realize in that instant that this isn't a simple matter. The next scene takes us to the Daejeon group. The secretary leads the way to meet the CEO. As predicted, there is no meal at all. As our protagonist's dad enters, Huang Wuyong's dad wastes no time tearing into him, pointing out that his bastard son beat up his son. The audacity of this man. Our protagonist's dad isn't impressed, so Huang Wuyong's dad asks what he plans to do. In response, our protagonist's dad suggests that Huang Wuyong's dad make an offer. After all, his son is the victim. As expected, the man demands that our protagonist be removed from the school. According to him, that's the only way he'll let things slide. Hearing this, our protagonist's dad expresses that it will be difficult because his wife insists that their son attend the school, and it will be hard to persuade her. Huang Wuyong's dad clearly doesn't like his response, so he tries to intimidate him, stating that he should agree now while he's being nice. Ironically, his son said the exact same words before getting wrecked by our protagonist, but our protagonist's dad is built different. He isn't intimidated in the slightest and warns the man not to do something he'll regret. As a result, he gets punched in the face. Even after getting punched, he doesn't react. which of course irritates Huang Wuyong's dad. So he gets taught a harsh lesson by Huang Wuyong's dad. During the whole time, the man doesn't show any intention of fighting back. Naturally, Huang Wuyong's dad assumes he is weak and pathetic. Of all things, after venting, he threatens our protagonist's father and his family, making it clear he'll ensure they can never enter the country again. Little does he know he's about to learn why some men deliberately choose peace over violence. Seeing no reaction, he leaves, not forgetting to tell the secretary to take him to the hospital and give him money to cover the medical expenses. The secretary then takes our protagonist's dad to the best hospital. He hands him several checks of 10 million won, stating it's for the medical bills. When our protagonist's dad shows hesitation, the secretary insists it should be enough before telling him not to bother reporting to the police, since the department receives sponsorship and benefits from their group. Our protagonist's dad has heard enough and chooses to leave quietly. However, he snatches the checks from the secretary before leaving. Watching him go, the guy mocks him, calling him a pathetic loser. When the man gets home, he sees our protagonist and his wife waiting for him. Our protagonist is stunned to see him in such a state. However, the man insists he shouldn't worry. After all, he's a soldier, and he's definitely seen worse days. Meanwhile, his wife is absolutely furious. From her expression, we can tell something bad is about to happen. Sure enough, her husband locks himself inside his office. In record time, he hacks into the Daejeon Group's main servers. Huang Wuyong's dad dared to threaten his family. He's about to show him a fate worse than hell. The next day takes us to the Daejeon Group building. Huang Wuyong's dad is simply enjoying his morning coffee, not knowing hell is about to break loose. Just then, his secretary barges in without knocking. Seeing this, the man asks why he looks like someone being chased. Sweating, the secretary says things are really bad, which is never a good sign. After explaining that the servers are down, Huang Wuyong's dad demands to know what the IT team is doing, to which the secretary explains that their computers have been shut down. Not only that, all their portals are closed, and they're being flooded with refund requests. At the same time, the CEO's phone begins ringing. The moment he answers, he immediately regrets it. The banks are calling to inform him that their accounts have been frozen. Yeah, the guy is cooked. You can literally see it in his eyes. Later that evening, the man sits in his office, clearly trying to understand how everything turned chaotic overnight. Just then, someone enters his office. Without looking, he asks if there's any sign of a solution. When he gets no response, he turns and freezes in shock. The woman standing in his office is none other than our protagonist's mom. Huang Wuyong's dad naturally demands to know who she is and how she bypassed his security. She simply replies that she put all of them to sleep. In addition, the company's surveillance system is out of commission. Hearing this, Huang Wuyong's dad becomes furious. Already mad about the day's events, he thinks the woman is the perfect target to vent on. But boy, is he wrong. The woman easily pins him down, and surprisingly, he can't even move a muscle. Deliberately lowering her voice, she asks if he knows who he just messed with. While reaching for something, she explains that this is normally the part where she kills her target. But thankfully, her man insists it's wrong to give her permission to kill. So she came up with the perfect alternative. Since he dared to threaten her love and her son, she's going to put him to sleep and only wake him after 3 years so her beloved son can graduate in peace. With parents like these, our protagonist is officially the safest kid on the planet. By the following day, our protagonist is getting ready to head to school. As he announces that he is leaving, he turns around and sees his parents acting cheerful as always, while his mom wishes him a great day. Anyways, our protagonist is about to apologize for his mistake. However, his mom assures him not to worry, revealing that she and his dad have already taken care of everything, so he should just head to school without any concerns. Now, our protagonist is truly confused. The next scene takes us to school, where the classroom is lively as usual. While chatting with her friend, Lee Ara suddenly turns and notices our protagonist looking at her, so she naturally waves at him with a smile. Our protagonist responds politely, all while thinking about Jin-suk's words about how South Korea is the kind of country where families can interfere in anything. He realizes this will make his mission even harder. Pulling him from his thoughts, Jin-suk suddenly asks if our protagonist has heard the news. Apparently, it has something to do with Huang Wuyong's dad. He explains that something happened to the man, and even his company is beginning to feel the effects. Our protagonist is genuinely caught off guard after hearing this. Still, Jin-suk continues, even speculating that the man might have suffered a stroke, a heart attack, or perhaps something in between. Now, our protagonist remembers his mom's words about handling the situation, so he naturally begins to wonder if his parents were really responsible for this. Still, he cannot be sure, so he dismisses the thought. Just then, someone pulls him out of his thoughts again. The person responsible turns out to be Lee Ara, who excitedly asks if he has any plans for the weekend. Seeing this, Jinsuk asks if she is planning to invite our protagonist somewhere. She nods and explains that it is her birthday party. Of course, Jinsuk does not like the idea, though he hides it well. Judging from our boy's expression, Lee Ara can tell he has never been to a birthday party before, so she happily invites him personally to come. Our protagonist promises that he will be there, so she decides to DM him the location later. After she leaves, Jinsuk keeps staring at our protagonist. He clearly does not like the attention our protagonist is getting. Not long after, the man of the hour finally enters the classroom. Huang Wuyong first scans the room and is immediately taken by surprise because our protagonist is comfortably sitting in his usual seat. Still, he quietly walks to another seat, ignoring Lee Ara's questions and concern about his father. Our protagonist is also observing him closely. Later that day, after school ends, our protagonist is seen waiting outside. After waiting for a while, he thinks about his dad and concludes that he might not come since he is probably still recovering. Just then, someone interrupts his thoughts by calling out to him. The group turns out to be his classmates. The girl in the middle nervously asks if our protagonist is heading home alone. Our protagonist answers honestly. Hearing this, the girl asks if he would like to follow them, adding that they usually take the bus together. Our protagonist does not see a problem with it, so he agrees. Seeing this, the girls seize the opportunity to introduce themselves. The one leading the group is Shin Yunha, while the guy next to her is Seo Dongjun. Her best friend is Jeon Yeju, and both of them almost simultaneously express that it is nice to meet our protagonist. Kang Jeon replies the same way, noting that he is glad to be acquainted with them. Shifting the topic, Shin Yunha asks where our protagonist lives. He tells them that he stays at Banpo Blue Tower. The group's reaction is expected, leaving our protagonist puzzled. Shin Yunha explains that our protagonist must be really rich because Banpo Blue Tower is the most expensive apartment complex in the city. Like any rich kid, our boy casually replies that the place belongs to his parents. Nonetheless, Shin Yunha explains that their cram school is nearby, meaning they can all take the same bus. In addition, she mentions that she knows a great tteokbokki place in front of the cram school. She is clearly asking our protagonist to hang out with them. Our protagonist responds with confusion since he does not know what tteokbokki is. Seeing this, Shin Yunha invites him to come anyway, while inwardly looking forward to it. The next scene shifts to the inside of the restaurant, where our protagonist's table is filled with food. Jeon Yeju takes a bite and comments that this restaurant serves the best tteokbokki around. Shin Yunha agrees before turning her attention to our protagonist. Apparently, our guy has yet to take a single bite, making her wonder if this is his first time trying the food. Our protagonist silently shakes his head in response. However, the moment he takes a bite, he finds it unbelievably spicy, as if his mouth is on fire. Seeing this, Shin Yunha immediately pours him a drink, unlike her friends, who enjoy his reaction and laugh as if it is the funniest thing in the world. After taking a drink to calm down, our protagonist thanks her. Suddenly, Jeon Yeju expresses surprise that our protagonist was able to fit in at school so quickly. Seo Dongjun chimes in, saying that it is surprising how someone who just transferred is already hanging out with Jinsuk and Huang Wuyong. Although they are all in the special class, Shin Yunha explains that they are very different from people like Jinsuk and his group of friends. Hearing this, our protagonist asks what she means and if she can clarify. She falls silent for a moment before revealing that they fall short compared to Jinsuk and his circle. Despite this, Jeon Yeju points out that Shin Yunha is still the top student in the entire school. Still, Shin Yunha does not find anything special about it since, in her opinion, it is only natural for her to come out on top when she is competing against rich kids. At this point, our protagonist realizes that Shin Yunha and her friends were not included in the files he received. In other words, they are ordinary students simply attending the school. Anyways, they continue minding their business until a group of troublemakers suddenly enters the restaurant. The group scoffs in disbelief, wondering what students from an elite school are doing in such a rundown place. Our protagonist wears a puzzled expression. The troublemakers immediately locked eyes on him, accusing students like him of causing trouble and taking all the space in the restaurant for themselves. Ironically, they are saying this despite being the only customers left in the restaurant. Shin Yunha and her friends feel intimidated and fall silent, causing the troublemakers to grow even more arrogant as they ask if they are being ignored. Now they are really starting to piss off our protagonist. Reading the room, Seo Dongjun suggests that they all leave. However, he is immediately stopped by one of the bullies. Trying to avoid trouble, he explains that they are simply done eating, which is why they are leaving. Still, the guy refuses to let them go. He points out that they come from a rich school, so it is only natural for them to pay for their meal. Our protagonist has finally had enough. Grabbing the idiot by the hand, he asks if they are perhaps beggars. The group is stunned, but the bully quickly yanks his hand free from our protagonist's grip. One of the gang members never imagines they would encounter someone with such guts. Our protagonist doesn't respond. When the guy mentions that they usually scare students into paying for their meals, our protagonist finally understands. He realizes they are thieves, not beggars, which is somehow even more pathetic. Nonetheless, the guy insists they pay for the meal because that is the only way he will let Shin Yunha and her friend go to their cram school in peace. The moment he says that, the group becomes uneasy. Because of that remark, our protagonist tells the bully that he can no longer leave and suggests they all have a little chat outside. Understanding his intentions, Shin Yunha quickly offers to pay to prevent things from escalating. She explains that our protagonist is a transfer student and doesn't know how things work around here. The bully finds this interesting and wonders if our protagonist is deliberately acting tough just to look cool. However, our protagonist stops Shin Yunha and reassures her not to be anxious. Crossing his arms, Kang Gion tells the group that his parents are so rich that they live on the royal floor of Bampo Tower. Of course, the group is stunned. Shin Yunha and her friend already know he is wealthy, but the royal floor is on an entirely different level of expensive. As if to prove his point, our protagonist casually pulls out a stack of bills. Now he asks the bullies if they are interested in having a chat with him outside. In other words, someone is about to get wrecked. Outside the restaurant, our protagonist calmly observes his surroundings and realizes there are no CCTV cameras nearby. Meanwhile, one of the bully group members wonders why our protagonist is acting so confident. Another replies, asking why they should even care. While they discuss what they believe will be an easy score, our protagonist sinks into his thoughts. As usual, he considers several ways he could end the fight. However, he quickly notes to himself that most of them are too extreme. These are just brainless teenagers, meaning he needs to hold back somehow. Just then, one of them approaches, acting as though he is the chosen one, while asking our protagonist if he knows who he is messing with. He charges forward with clenched fists, proudly declaring that they are students from the Seoul High boxing team. However, our protagonist simply dodges the punch by tilting his head slightly. The entire group is left stunned. Our protagonist mocks him, asking if he can really call himself a boxer, because the guy is definitely slower than an old lady. Furious, the guy launches another punch, but this time our boy responds with a vicious uppercut. Immediately, the fool is knocked out cold. The leader of the group is shocked that our protagonist knocks him out with a single punch. Now the entire group is shaken, causing the leader to tell the others to stop. Our protagonist seems confused, so the leader asks if he knows Wu Young by any chance. When our protagonist admits that he does, the leader becomes boastful, saying the guy used to be part of their boxing team. He has no idea that our protagonist once slapped Wu Young unconscious. Still, the leader arrogantly insists that our protagonist pay a monthly subscription fee of 500,000 won. According to him, that is the only way he will let things slide. Our protagonist narrows his eyes, realizing that this guy is far more vicious than the rest of the group. The leader insists that our protagonist think carefully if he doesn't want to get beaten up. When our protagonist remains silent, the leader takes it as a signal to attack. He immediately moves forward, weaving left and right. However, our protagonist dodges his straight punches with ease. He watches calmly as the guy prepares an uppercut. Seeing our protagonist standing still, Shin Yuna and her friend fear the worst. However, in the very next second, the girl's eyes widen in shock. Our protagonist effortlessly stops the fool's punch midway with his foot. Seeing this, the guy becomes even more furious. He declares that he will teach our protagonist a lesson, but at that moment the police suddenly arrive. The group of bullies sees this and immediately bolts off. leaving behind the guy our protagonist knocked unconscious. Seeing this, our boy slowly takes out his phone. Then, with lightning precision, he tosses it forward, striking the leader of the bullies straight in the head. As a result, the guy collapses to the ground. One of the policemen immediately rushes over and restrains him. Eventually, they all arrive at the police station. Inside the waiting area, the bully leader is completely furious at our protagonist. Meanwhile, an officer is taking statements from Shin Yunha and her friends. They report everything that happened, including how the bullies were extorting money from them. When the officer asks if that is really what happened, he points out that stealing is a serious offense. The leader quickly changes the narrative, claiming he only wanted to borrow money from them and wonders if that is somehow forbidden among students. The officer looks exhausted from dealing with the teenagers, but Shin Yunha firmly insists that they are the real victims here. The bully leader immediately fires back, asking about his friend who was knocked unconscious, and whether he is not a victim too. The group shouts in response that they only attacked him because they had all ganged up on our protagonist first. However, the officer finally has enough of their arguing and threatens to rewrite all their statements from the beginning. As a result, both sides immediately fall silent. Meanwhile, our protagonist silently thinks to himself about how troublesome the entire situation has become. Moments later, the bully's teacher arrives at the station. The moment the bully locks eyes with his teacher, it becomes obvious he is completely screwed. Seeing this, the teacher apologizes on the student's behalf and asks whether the boy did anything serious. The officer immediately responds that the student didn't cause anything major. Hearing this, the teacher apologizes once more and promises to keep a closer eye on him. The officer, however, insists it is not an issue, since the man turns out to be a rather famous figure. Anyways, Chu Seonsu immediately approaches his student and grabs him by the ear, furiously scolding him for getting into a fight when his debut match is right around the corner. Just then, he glances toward our protagonist. Seeing no reaction from him, Chu Seonsu simply leaves while still dragging the bully by the ear. After that, the police officer informs everyone that they can only leave once their parents arrive to pick them up. Moments later, our protagonist's dad arrives at the station. Seeing the blank expression on his son's face, the man simply suggests they head home with a smile. However, once they arrive home, the smile disappears from his face, and he becomes serious after hearing everything that happened. Our protagonist apologizes, while his mom insists that he only acted to help his friends. Even so, her husband points out that it is still unacceptable, and that our protagonist should have handled things before the police became involved. Because in South Korea, everything gets recorded. Hearing this, our protagonist apologizes once again. Seeing his expression, his mom reassures him that he should not worry, because things ultimately turned out fine. When our protagonist comments that things are far more complicated in South Korea, his dad immediately asks if he is making excuses again. Our protagonist instantly denies it and, like a disciplined special soldier, swears that he will never let something like this happen again. Once again, our protagonist sits down at his computer and begins researching the police system and other matters related to school violence. The very next day, our protagonist takes the bus to school. This is because he insists that he will be taking the bus from now on and tells his dad not to come pick him up anymore. Just then, our protagonist spots the same bully from before standing together with Hwang Woo-young. He cannot really tell what they are talking about. However, the moment the guy realizes our protagonist is staring in their direction, he immediately runs off while our protagonist approaches Hwang Woo-young instead. Our protagonist politely asks what they were talking about. It is obvious they were discussing him, but Hwang Woo-young coldly replies that it is none of his business. With that, he walks away. At the same time, Shin Yunha and her friends approach our protagonist. Not long after, Jin-suk arrives at school. The guy casually steps out of his car and immediately begins staring at our protagonist as though he did something wrong. So the moment they settle into class, Jin-suk immediately asks our protagonist when he started hanging out with those people. Kang Gyeon looks confused, pointing out that they are all classmates. In response, Jin-suk insists that he should only be friends with people on the same level, and that our boy simply cannot hang out with people like Shin Yunha and her friends. Our protagonist just stares at him, internally wondering what exactly he is talking about. Regardless, Jin-suk warns him not to get on his nerves. And just like that, the conversation ends. A few moments later, both of their phones vibrate at the same time. Checking the group chats, they see that Lee Ara has sent the location for her upcoming birthday party. The girl and her friends are clearly looking forward to our protagonist showing up. As usual, our protagonist replies politely. That alone is enough to make Jin-seok furious. Later, at the school cafeteria, our boy is busy devouring his food like he has not eaten in ages. Shin Yoon-ha and her friends are about to join him when Jin-seok suddenly approaches from behind. Without hesitation, he tells the group to move. Immediately, the girls head to a different table. Now sitting alone with our protagonist, Jin-seok asks if he cannot at least give Shin Yoon-ha and her group a hint. He explains that they will naturally keep coming over if he keeps acting soft and approachable. The guy keeps rambling, comparing Shin Yoon-ha and her friends to hyenas, while our protagonist listens silently without offering a single word in return. Not long after, Lee Ara appears and asks if our protagonist happened to see her TikTok. She reminds him to make sure he attends her birthday party. As expected, our protagonist replies politely. Meanwhile, her friends tease that he must be happy because the girl is clearly making advances to secure him for herself. Hearing this, Jin-seok finally becomes fed up. He leaves, not forgetting to instruct our protagonist to finish all the food. Our protagonist simply stares at him. He quietly calls Jin-seok a bastard for trying to waste perfectly good food. Then he wonders what he should even do before asking himself the truly important question. Will he actually be able to finish both trays of food? Anyways, we shift to the end of the school day. Our protagonist is about to join Shin Yoon-ha and her friends to take the bus home when Jin-seok suddenly interrupts him, insisting that he tag along instead. Our protagonist thanks him for the offer, but insists on taking the bus. The bastard scoffs before telling him that he was not asking. It is obvious our protagonist dislikes this, but for the sake of avoiding trouble around his friends, he reluctantly agrees. Later, inside the car, Jin-seok starts the conversation by reminding our protagonist that he already told him to stop hanging around Shin Yoon-ha and her friends. At this point, our protagonist is genuinely beginning to find Jin-seok prickly and annoying. Without waiting for a response, Jin-seok tells him that he is not allowed to attend Lee Ara's birthday party. He explains that it annoys him, though our protagonist still cannot understand what exactly the problem is. So when our protagonist asks him to explain properly, Jin-seok finally says it directly. It bothers him seeing Lee Ara act so friendly toward another guy. Now our protagonist is completely convinced that this guy is insane. Still, when Jin-seok mentions that their families are close and have already discussed things between them, our protagonist becomes even more confused, almost wondering if the guy is speaking in some kind of encrypted code. Seeing that he still does not understand, Jin-seok finally reveals the truth. Someday, Lee Ara is supposed to become his wife, so seeing her get friendly with another guy irritates him. Our protagonist says nothing, making Jin-seok question his silence and ask if the situation upset him. Instead, our protagonist calmly points out that Jin-seok is only acting this way because he feels insecure and jealous. Without waiting for a response, our protagonist tells the driver to pull over. Now Jin-seok becomes furious, asking if our protagonist really dares to disrespect him. In response, our protagonist gives him a cold stare, one sharp enough to startle him. He steps out of the car, not forgetting to mention that this is not how friends treat each other. Then he slams the door shut with force. Feeling insulted, Jin-seok immediately orders his driver to mess our protagonist up. The driver, who also serves as his bodyguard, looks confused for a moment. So Jin-seok repeats the command, insisting that the man teach our protagonist a lesson. The bodyguard remains cold and unmoved. Seeing this, Jin-seok demands to know if the man wants to get fired. In response to his threats, the driver reminds Jin-seok that his contract is with Jin-seok's father, not the son. Basically, he isn't some common thug for hire. Jin-seok grows furious. Picking up his phone, he decides to call his father because, in his mind, an employee must do as they are told. After calling his dad and explaining the situation, he hands the phone over to the bodyguard. Once he receives orders from Jin-seok's father, the bodyguard's demeanor shifts. He steps out of the vehicle and approaches our boy in the middle of the street. He tells him to go back and apologize to Jin-seok because he does not want to be known for beating up a kid. Our boy stands his ground, questioning why he should apologize when he has done nothing wrong. The bodyguard's eyes narrow as he explains that, in this world, right and wrong do not matter. Only power does. If that is truly the case, our boy points out that he has even less reason to apologize, causing the bodyguard to fall silent. Now he looks up at a nearby CCTV camera, noting that there are too many witnesses watching the street. He suggests they find somewhere more private where they can talk properly without interruptions. After saying this, our protagonist turns and leaves. The bodyguard stands there briefly. After analyzing the situation, he decides to return to the car, which catches our protagonist by surprise. Inside the car, Jin Seok immediately demands to know what the man is doing because he has not taught our protagonist a lesson. In response, the bodyguard points out that the CCTV cameras make such a task impossible. Hearing this, Jin Seok becomes furious. He shouts at the guard, insisting that if that were the case, he should have dragged our protagonist somewhere else and beaten him there. The bodyguard reminds him that his main priority is protection, so naturally he cannot do that. This only makes Jin Seok even angrier as he claims the man is just making excuses, left with no choice. The bodyguard reminds Jin Seok that with the upcoming election, his father's orders are clear. Avoid any public scandals that could damage their image. Perhaps, if the young master truly wants him to teach our protagonist a lesson, he should set aside a proper date and time for it. Jin Seok pauses after hearing this. He turns toward our protagonist, only to see no reaction from him at all. Our boy simply turns around and leaves, making Jin Seok grit his teeth so hard in anger that his jaw almost trembles. Anyway, our protagonist soon arrives home, unaware that someone has been waiting for him. The person expresses surprise that our protagonist actually lives at Bampo Tower. It is the leader of the Bullies, the same group our boy humiliated during their last encounter. Holding up his phone, the thug shows a live image of Seo Dongjun trembling in fear. He mocks our boy, making it clear that their business from the police station is far from over and that they are not done talking yet. Following the thug's directions, our boy arrives at a secluded industrial construction site. Inside, the rest of the gang lounges around like vultures waiting for their prey to appear. Our boy walks straight into the center of the trap without even a hint of hesitation. He glances at his captured friend before looking back at the gang leader. The thug sneers mockingly, explaining that Seo Dongjun was merely bait to lure him here. Since our protagonist has shown up, they decide to let Seo Dongjun go. Just then, the leader warns Seo Dongjun not to contact the police, or else the girls he hangs out with will definitely have a hard time. Hearing this, Seo Dongjun quickly stammers out an apology. However, our protagonist simply places a hand on his shoulder and tells him to stay here because they will be leaving together. Seo Dongjun looks confused, but in the very next second, our protagonist dashes straight toward the group of bullies. The sudden move catches everyone off guard. Still, the leader quickly raises his arms to block the incoming attack. Unfortunately for him, that was only a feint. The real strike has already slammed into his stomach. The impact sends the bully flying backward before he crashes hard into a stack of crates. Just like that, the guy is knocked out cold. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang can only stare in shock, but our boy gives them no time to recover. He immediately starts taking them down one after another. Seeing this, one of the thugs visibly begins to panic. Still, the guy charges at our protagonist while yelling insults at him. Kang Gyeon calmly responds with a punch straight to the chin. The thug instantly drops to the ground. Seo Dongjun witnesses everything unfolding before his eyes, leaving him completely stunned. Meanwhile, the leader of the bullies slowly regains consciousness. The guy stares around in disbelief after realizing every single one of his men has been defeated by our protagonist alone. Then he notices our boy staring at him coldly. That single look is enough to make him break into a cold sweat. At this point, nobody needs to tell the guy that he is completely screwed. Now the guy begins to show fear. Our protagonist simply turns toward a plank lying on the ground. Grabbing it, he snaps it cleanly in two. Then he pulls out a splinter from the wood. The bully has no idea what he is planning. Instead, he arrogantly asks if our protagonist really thinks this is over. But in the very next second, our protagonist grabs him and pins him to the ground. No matter how much the guy struggles, he cannot break free. Kang Gyeon remembers that the bully once mentioned he was a boxer. The guy can only watch as our protagonist brings the splinter close to his pinky finger. Halfway through, he suddenly pauses and suggests Seo Dongjun wait outside for him. After reading the room, the guy immediately heads out. Once the coast is clear, our protagonist warns the bully that if he dares come near his friend again, he will show him exactly what he will do to him. And just like that, the bully lets out an ear-deafening scream. The bully writhes in agony, tears streaming down his face. Meanwhile, our boy casually notes that the splinter only went 3 centimeters deep, yet the guy is already crying. So if the fool dares to come any closer, or show his face again, it will not just be 3 centimeters next time. It will be all his fingernails and toenails. After that, the bully quickly nods, finally getting a reality check. Only after our protagonist leaves do the others, who turn out to have been pretending to be unconscious, express relief that he is gone. Shifting outside, our protagonist thinks he may have gone a bit too far since they are all still kids. That comment suddenly makes him remember something from the past. Back then, he had been tied up as a child. He was not the only one. There were other kids there too. Before we can learn more, our protagonist shakes his head, trying to force the memory away. Anyways, he rejoins Seo Dongjun and tells him that he does not need to worry anymore. However, the guy is too shaken to even speak. Our protagonist reassures him not to be anxious, saying the bully surely understands now. Kang Gyeon then insists that what happened today must remain a secret between them. Seo Dongjun agrees. Hearing this, our protagonist suggests they grab some tteokbokki. At school, Shin Yunha and her friends greet him. Our protagonist replies politely, as usual. He also waves towards Seo Dongjun, and the two exchange greetings. Seeing this, our protagonist realizes things are finally getting better between them. Now our protagonist turns his attention toward Woo Young. The previous day, Seo Dongjun had explained everything, and it turns out Woo Young was involved in helping the bully grab poor Seo Dongjun. Our protagonist pieces everything together and remembers the time he spotted Woo Young with the bully group. So he confirms everything with Seo Dongjun, but now he wonders how he can settle things quickly, meaning setting Hwang Woo Young straight. While thinking about this, Jin Seok suddenly approaches and orders Woo Young to clear the gym. As he stares at our protagonist's lips curl into a smirk. He can already tell Jin Seok's intentions just from that look, and he thinks to himself that the idiot is about to make his plan much easier. However, to Jin Seok's shock, Hwang Woo Young refuses. He explains that his father is currently in the hospital, and he cannot afford to do anything reckless right now. Jin Seok immediately becomes irritated after hearing this. Seeing his reaction, our protagonist asks if things did not go his way. Jin Seok pauses for a moment before telling him to just wait, adding that he will definitely find a place to teach him a lesson. Our protagonist simply shrugs off the remark as if it means nothing, making Jin Seok absolutely furious. Anyways, our protagonist approaches Hwang Woo Young. Getting straight to the point, he demands to know why he did what he did to Seo Dongjun. When he sees Woo Young trying to play dumb, our protagonist immediately warns him not to ever use his friends again. As compensation, he orders Woo Young to empty the gym tonight. As for the reason why, our protagonist turns toward Jin Seok and insists that it is time they change the class hierarchy. Now Jin Seok is truly cooked. Finally, we are taken to Hwang Woo Young's father's company. Jin Seok's personal bodyguard steps out of the car. The man cannot believe he is really about to fight a student. Reflecting on our protagonist's fight, where he completely humiliated Woo Young, the guard can already tell that our protagonist had been deliberately holding back. Even so, he strongly believes there is no way he could lose to a mere high school kid. At the same time, Jin Seok's guard becomes startled when he notices someone approaching him. The man in glasses turns out to be his senior companion from his previous company. The senior remarks that it has been a while and mentions hearing that he quit the company. In response, Jin Seok's bodyguard apologizes, but the man insists there is no need for that. He says it was probably because of the poor salary, so he understands why someone like him would leave, especially since the bodyguard needs money for his mother's medical bills. After reminiscing about the past and discussing why he left the company, the senior finally reveals the main reason he returned to Korea. Apparently, he is on a mission, and for starters, it has something to do with Hwang Woo Young's dad. Jin Seok's bodyguard explains that he already read the report stating the man suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. However, his senior points out that the situation is far more serious than it appears. He explains that the mission came directly from higher-ups, and they suspect Hwang Woo Young's father has been marked by a mysterious figure known as Shadow. Hearing this, Jin Seok's bodyguard asks if the matter is really that serious. The man explains that it is not just that. Even the hacking and recent cyber attacks appear suspicious. He suspects the people responsible may be from the north, and the hacker involved is someone known by the codename Zero. Jin Seok's bodyguard cannot hide his doubt. The man understands why. After all, Shadow suddenly disappeared 10 years ago, and the target this time is not the president or prime minister. On top of that, Zero, a legendary hacker pursued by dangerous and powerful organizations worldwide, has somehow chosen to target a mere businessman whose company only ranks 30th in the world. So the idea that both mysterious figures would target one man simply does not make sense. Anyways, the man leaves before we even learn his name. Still, he notes that it was great seeing him again before deciding to focus on his mission. Hearing this, Jin Seok's guard wishes him well. He also wishes his senior a safe and healthy retirement. As for the case involving Shadow and Zero, he believes it is impossible for two such powerful and mysterious figures to both be in Korea. Ironically, those very figures are actually our protagonist's parents. We then shift inside Hwang Woo-young's father's company, where both our protagonist and the bodyguard prepare to fight. The guard obviously dislikes the idea of beating up a kid just for money and thinks the whole situation makes him pathetic. As a result, he starts thinking that maybe he should quit this job altogether. Just then, Jin Seok notices Woo-young leaving. He wonders why the guy does not want to stick around. Woo-young replies that he already made all the preparations and did everything Jin Seok asked of him. Jin Seok then wonders aloud if the guy is still sulking because our protagonist humiliated him. Woo-young simply says he is not interested and starts walking away. Before Jin Seok can say another word, our protagonist immediately stops him. He tells Jin Seok that if he defeats his bodyguard, then Jin Seok himself will officially become his lackey. Of course, Jin Seok is furious after hearing that. Our protagonist explains that if they do not settle things now, Jin Seok will simply keep sending more people after him. In the end, it does not really matter to him. The only problem is that this endless cycle of fighting will never stop. So, to finally put an end to everything, Jin Seok has to make a decision. Otherwise, the fight is off. Hearing this, Jin Seok mocks him, claiming there is no way our protagonist can beat his bodyguard. He confidently reveals that the man is a former secret agent from the National Intelligence Service. As a result, our protagonist carefully observes the guard before commenting that things have finally started getting interesting. Before the fight begins, Jin Seok's bodyguard insists that our protagonist can still apologize and everything will be over. Kang Gi-on simply tells him to stop acting like a saint. He points out that the man is a former agent, yet he didn't hesitate to fight a kid just because he was getting paid. In response, the man notes that from our protagonist's perspective, that's exactly what it looks like. But it's not like he has a choice, which is why he keeps insisting that our protagonist apologize. Hearing this, our protagonist reveals that he doesn't like the idea, asking what the man plans to do. In response, the man says our protagonist leaves him no choice. However, before he can even finish his statement, a kick is already flying straight toward his face. The man manages to dodge just in time. Otherwise, his head might have just disconnected from his body. However, our protagonist isn't done. Using the same momentum from his previous kick, he delivers another strike straight to the man's stomach. After this brief exchange, our protagonist expresses surprise. Apparently, the man blocked his strike. Meanwhile, the guard realizes that our protagonist is way faster and stronger than he imagined. Meanwhile, Jin Seok keeps staring, trying to understand what just happened. Nonetheless, the guard notes that our protagonist wasn't bad. Still, he adds that using such half-assed techniques learned online against a skilled opponent will only get him hurt. Our protagonist realizes the guard is completely different. At first, he considers letting the man win, but he immediately changes his mind because of Jin Seok. When the guard begins approaching, our protagonist decides to take things seriously and see what the former agent of the National Intelligence Service can really do. The moment the man steps within his combat range, our protagonist moves immediately. However, the man dodges his strike and realizes that our protagonist didn't make a fist, meaning he was aiming for his eyes. Our protagonist instantly follows up with another punch. The man dodges again and grabs him by the shirt. Jin Seok's bodyguard seems to be aiming for a body throw. However, our protagonist immediately prevents it by using a leg lock. The bodyguard clearly didn't expect this. Meanwhile, our protagonist seizes the chance to break free from his grip. The moment he frees himself and puts himself in a favorable position, our protagonist finally lands a punch from the side. The guard immediately creates distance. Clenching the spot where he was hit, he soon realizes that our protagonist wasn't using martial arts at all. Meanwhile, our protagonist also realizes that holding back definitely won't work against the guard. Seeing this development, Jin Seok, who has been silent the entire time, suddenly screams at his bodyguard, telling him to get serious and destroy our protagonist. However, our protagonist simply turns to him, making him wish he hadn't said anything. The fight resumes, and this time the bodyguard takes the initiative. To the man's disbelief, our protagonist easily stops him and follows up with a knee strike. However, the man dodges it and grabs him by the collar. Once again, he goes for a grip, aiming to slam our protagonist onto the floor. But in the middle of the motion, our protagonist counters him. His actions are so fast that I can't even put them into words. Anyways, he places the bodyguard into an armlock submission as they crash onto the ground. However, to our protagonist's shock, the bodyguard looks as if he didn't feel anything. As a result, our protagonist breaks the hold and creates distance. Anyways, our protagonist expresses surprise. He points out that throughout the entire fight, the man didn't use his fists, so he naturally tells the bodyguard that he isn't skilled enough to go easy on him. The bodyguard didn't expect our protagonist to figure that out. So, he apologizes for underestimating him, to which our protagonist insists that he become serious. To everyone's shock, the man declares his loss. Our protagonist shows a puzzled expression, while Jin Seok is completely stunned by the declaration. With this, the man tells our protagonist that he doesn't need to apologize. Jin Seok becomes furious upon hearing this, and insists that the man fight seriously this time. He even threatens to fire him. However, the man tells him there's no need to go that far because he's already planning to resign as his bodyguard. Before leaving, he tells our protagonist that he would like to have a proper spar someday, perhaps outside the ring and without distractions. Of course, our protagonist agrees. With the bodyguard gone, he slowly turns his attention toward Jin Seok. Now the guy is sweating profusely. As usual, our protagonist suggests they have a little chat alone. Damn, bro is really cooked. Our protagonist slowly begins approaching Jin Seok, wondering aloud how he should deal with him, instantly making the guy break out into a cold sweat. Jin Seok loudly warns our protagonist not to come any closer, immediately using his dad as a shield. Hearing this, our protagonist smiles. He already knows that Jin Seok's father is currently running for president and practically has the election in the bag. That realization makes Jin Seok regain some confidence. However, our protagonist immediately silences him before he can even speak. In his mind, our protagonist realizes that Jin Seok is nothing more than a spoiled brat, considering how he keeps going on and on about his father. At first, our protagonist had considered letting him off, simply because the guy treated him to a fancy meal once. Unfortunately, the idiot mistook that kindness for weakness. Now he's even trying to order our protagonist around. As a result, the fool has crossed an imaginary line. Once again, our protagonist silences him by shoving his hand straight onto his face, casually watching the guy tremble like a leaf. Our protagonist mockingly asks if he's really this scared. Still, Jin Seok refuses to back down. He convinces himself that our protagonist is the one who's scared and knows he can't actually touch him. Hearing this, Kang Gi-on tilts his head slightly, almost as if suggesting they test that claim. And just like that, our protagonist slowly begins applying force. Now he is completely gripping the fool by the face. Jin Seok immediately begins struggling to break free, because he's finding it difficult to breathe. Eventually, our protagonist lets him go. He calmly points out that this is merely a warning, thinking Jin Seok would finally take the hint. However, our protagonist can only shake his head, as Jin Seok completely fails to understand his situation and starts bringing up his father once again. And just like before, every single time Jin Seok threatens him, our protagonist applies even more pressure. Eventually, Jin Seok finally gives up. Now our protagonist tells him to listen carefully. He explains that there are countless ways he can hurt him without leaving a single scratch on his body. Furthermore, our protagonist informs him that he can easily make his entire high school life a living hell. Of course, he already knows that with Jin Seok's personality, there's no way the guy will stay quiet. He'll probably try using his daddy's power and influence like the spoiled child he is. Looking him dead in the eyes, Kang Gi-on asks if he seriously thinks he looks even slightly scared of his father or his influence. After all, our protagonist's parents could easily kill the president if they truly wanted to. Still, our protagonist explains that he simply came to Korea to go to school, make friends, get a job, and live a normal life. Almost as if reading Jin Seok's thoughts about getting revenge, our protagonist warns him that if he ever discovers that Jin Seok dared interfere with his life, then things won't end well for him. He doesn't even need to elaborate further. And just like that, our protagonist successfully traumatizes Jin Seok. Just then, Huang Wuyong suddenly jumps in and insists that our protagonist stop already. He immediately moves to help Jin Seok up. Seeing this pathetic display, our protagonist mockingly wonders aloud why they're acting like victims when they normally do the exact same thing to other people. Hearing this, Huang Wuyong promises that they'll stop and even swears to keep an eye on Jin Seok. Watching the two of them leave, our protagonist wonders if this was really enough, because honestly, it feels lacking. The next scene takes us to Seoul High School. Our protagonist has just arrived when he immediately notices something strange. Jin Seok didn't show up to school, which is honestly unusual. Our protagonist even starts wondering if it's because he failed to finish the job properly the previous day. Just then, Lee Ara interrupts his train of thought. She reminds him that her birthday party is the next day and tells him not to forget to come. Our protagonist nods, indicating that he definitely won't miss it. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to Jin Seok anxiously reporting everything that happened. He desperately insists that he was beaten and practically begs his father to believe him. After enduring the constant pestering, the man finally stops what he's doing. His father, the representative of the Liberty Party, and the man most likely to become the next president of South Korea, simply stares at him with sharp eyes that feel capable of cutting through steel. In the next chapter, Jin Seok begins throwing another tantrum. His dad can only sigh, saying that even if he got beaten up, that still isn't a good enough reason for him to skip school. In response, his son argues that the person responsible attends the same school and he's simply terrified of our protagonist. Not to mention, he almost got suffocated. Hearing this, his old man tells him to stop exaggerating, pointing out that there isn't a single scratch on his body. So how can he claim he was beaten up? His father insists that he toughen up, adding that he's no longer in elementary school where he can throw tantrums just because he got hurt. When Jin Seok admits that he still doesn't want to go to school because of our protagonist, his father casually suggests that he go study in America like his sister. Right after saying that, he calls his secretary and tells her to let Agent Han inside. Surprisingly enough, Agent Han turns out to be Jin Seok's bodyguard. We only learn his name after 16 whole chapters. The moment Jin Seok sees him, he immediately starts accusing Agent Han of abandoning him and causing him to get beaten up. However, Agent Han doesn't respond at all. Instead, Jin Seok's father tells his son to remain quiet while adults are talking. He then warns him to show some respect because if he knew what it took to bring Agent Han back, he wouldn't be acting this way. Turning toward Agent Han, the man apologizes for his son's behavior. He admits that his own negligence spoiled Jin Seok because he was born late into the family. Before anything else can continue, Agent Han calmly states that if he is assigned as Jin Seok's bodyguard again, he will resign immediately. In response, the man reveals there's no need for that. Apparently, his son is simply making way too much fuss over something small. In other words, the reason he likely called Agent Han over was to confirm whether Jin Seok's story was actually true. The moment Agent Han confirms that everything is true, Jin Seok's father is left stunned, while Jin Seok immediately points out that he's been telling the truth the entire time. However, Agent Han isn't done speaking. With a serious expression, he warns Jin Seok not to think about messing with our protagonist ever again. Now the man is both curious and shocked as he asks what exactly he means by that. In response, Agent Han explains that even as a former special agent, he isn't certain he could win against our protagonist. Jin Seok's father falls silent after hearing this. With less than 6 months left until the election, causing unnecessary trouble would be extremely unwise, especially considering how many political parties have lost public support because of their children being involved in school violence scandals. Since our protagonist is this outstanding, Jin Seok's father can't help but wonder why his son never tried making someone like him a friend. Then again, with Jin Seok's current mindset, maybe that was impossible from the start. Jin Seok tries to explain that he actually did try, but the problem was our protagonist himself. Unfortunately, his father has already heard enough of his tantrums. The next scene takes us to the Hilton Hotel. Our protagonist arrives at the location of Lee Ara's birthday party. To his surprise, the venue happens to be the exact same place where Jin Seok once treated him to a meal. While looking around, one of the staff members recognizes him immediately. Our protagonist also realizes that he arrived a whole 30 minutes early. At that moment, he figures out that for the staff member to recognize him on sight, Lee Ara must have done quite a bit of research about him beforehand. Nonetheless, the man keeps smiling politely and invites our protagonist inside. As our protagonist steps in, he is left stunned by what he sees. Compared to the last time he visited, the interior looks completely different. Just then, the birthday girl herself appears while happily calling out to our protagonist. She immediately asks about her outfit and whether she looks pretty. Of course, our protagonist nods playfully. Satisfied with his reaction, she leaves for a moment while telling him to wait a little longer, since the others will arrive soon. Moments later, guests begin showing up one after another. As expected, they're all rich kids. Our protagonist simply sits quietly while observing everyone around him. Meanwhile, Jin-seok finally makes his appearance. The moment their eyes meet, Jin-seok visibly flinches unintentionally. Unfortunately, Jin-seok makes the mistake of bringing his followers over to our protagonist's table. He is clearly trying to show off in front of him. However, our protagonist completely ignores him. Addressing the crowd, Lee Aura thanks everyone for attending. Normally, this would be the moment where her father steps in to greet the guests. However, she deliberately refuses because her dad would definitely end up bringing along his adult friends too. So, without wasting time, she reveals that she prepared something special for everyone tonight, and according to her, it's definitely something they'll never forget. Meanwhile, our protagonist continues observing the party, although this type of atmosphere is still difficult for him to adapt to. Right on cue, Priority Zero suddenly enters the party. Our protagonist is genuinely surprised to see her there. Meanwhile, Lee Aura happily addresses her as senior sister. Not long after, the crowd immediately swarms around them. As usual, our protagonist simply stays seated and continues observing everything from a distance. Still, he never expected Lee Aura to be close to Priority Zero. Just then, Jin-seok decides that now of all times is the perfect moment to start acting up again. He's about to tell our protagonist that it's still not too late to apologize. However, the moment our protagonist casually raises his hand near his face, Jin-seok instantly jumps backward and falls straight onto the ground. Damn, our protagonist really traumatized this guy. Suddenly, the lights go out. At the same time, the entire atmosphere shifts, causing our protagonist to wonder what exactly is happening. Because of this sudden development, our protagonist immediately becomes alert. He starts carefully observing everyone's movements. After all, there's no way on earth there would suddenly be a power outage in South Korea. Just then, he notices several people advancing through the darkness. Our protagonist quickly counts 9 of them and instantly begins assuming this is some kind of terrorist attack. Thankfully, before the lights went out, he had already marked the locations of Priority Zero and Lee Aura. And since there are no bodyguards present, the moment one of the suspicious figures starts moving toward the 2 girls, our protagonist immediately senses it. This completely confirms his suspicions. Without even thinking, he dashes toward the guy in a flash. The man turns around and sees our protagonist rushing straight at him. The look in our boy's eyes alone is enough to tell the poor guy he's absolutely screwed. And just like that, the guy lets out a loud scream. When the lights finally come back on, everyone in the hall is staring directly at our protagonist. Meanwhile, the supposed terrorist desperately tells him to get off. When our protagonist still doesn't respond, the poor guy starts begging for someone to save him. Meanwhile, Lee Aura and Priority Zero simply continue staring at him in silence. Eventually, our protagonist finally comes back to his senses, causing him to immediately back away. At the same time, Priority Zero begins thinking about his actions and starts believing he might actually be some kind of professional operative. It is later revealed that the blackout was simply part of a performance, and the people moving in the dark were actually members of a boy idol group. Unfortunately, nobody is paying attention to the performance anymore, especially Lee Aura. The girl is obviously annoyed at our protagonist for ruining the event she worked so hard to prepare. This makes him quietly reflect on his actions and regret what he did. At the end of the party, our protagonist heads home alone. As he walks, he lets out a sigh and wonders why he genuinely thought there would be a hostage situation in South Korea. Back at the party, Lee Aura is completely furious. She asks if our protagonist has any idea how much effort she went through just to secure the idol group for the performance. While our protagonist apologizes, Priority Zero suddenly steps in and tells Lee Aura to stop. She then asks whether she honestly didn't find our protagonist's actions cool. In response, Lee Aura becomes even more furious, almost throwing a tantrum like a child. Meanwhile, Priority Zero simply smiles and points out that our protagonist only acted that way because he was trying to protect them. She even asks what would have happened if it actually had been a hostage situation. In that case, our protagonist jumping in without hesitation would have been incredibly cool. The moment Liara starts seeing things from that perspective, she slowly turns toward our protagonist as if trying to confirm it herself. And judging by his reaction, the answer is obvious. Because of this, Priority Zero teasingly compliments him, saying that Liara might have just found herself a dark night. And just like that, the two girls burst into laughter together. Meanwhile, our protagonist quietly reflects on everything. He finally reveals Priority Zero's identity. It turns out that Han Yuju is actually the daughter of the current president. While thinking about this, our protagonist realizes that he has successfully made contact with her. The very next day at school, our protagonist barely enters the classroom before Liara immediately swarms him while repeatedly calling him Dark Knight. Naturally, our protagonist becomes confused by the strange nickname. One of the girls nearby comments that our protagonist is surprisingly smooth when it comes to flirting with girls. Turning toward Liara, she jokingly asks if the two of them are now exclusive and secretly dating. Liara immediately laughs while brushing the remark aside, insisting it's not like that. Meanwhile, our boy maintains an awkward smile while quietly heading toward his seat. However, before he can even sit down, Jin Seok suddenly speaks up, pointing out that our protagonist ruined Liara's birthday party. This guy again. When our protagonist doesn't respond, Jin Seok nervously asks why he's staring at him like that, before awkwardly trying to act tough by asking if he thinks he can mess with him again. Almost instantly, our protagonist slowly extends his hand toward Jin Seok's face. As a result, Jin Seok lets out a startled sound before immediately falling onto the ground. This instantly grabs the attention of everyone in the classroom. Just then, a helping hand stretches toward him. Surprisingly, it's our protagonist helping him back up. Afterward, he calmly asks Jin Seok if he really likes Liara that much. If that's the case, then he should confess properly like a man, instead of constantly making excuses and bothering everyone around him. Since the midterm exams are approaching, our protagonist warns him not to test his patience. And just like that, he immediately returns to studying. This time his goal is to become the top scorer in the entire school. We then skip to the day of the exams. Our protagonist is frantically writing down answers non-stop. Honestly, he looks like someone using the Death Note to write names. And just like that, he finishes before everyone else, while low-key imitating Light Yagami from Death Note. The rest of the class are completely stunned that our protagonist has already finished, while they're all still struggling halfway through the exam. Now we skip to the final results of the midterms. Predictably, our protagonist ranks first in the entire school, followed by Shin Yunha in second place and Jang Dongwoo in third. Seeing the results, our protagonist quietly thinks to himself that, as usual, his mission is progressing smoothly.